On July 27, 1948, in a holding cell at Camp King near Oberursel, West Germany, Otto Skorzeny walked out a side gate at dusk wearing an American military police uniform he had not been issued. The late July heat had not yet broken in the Taunus Hills, and the rubber soles of borrowed boots made almost no sound on the gravel as a 6'4" Austrian with the diagonal scar of a Vienna dueling fraternity across his left cheek passed 3 US sentries who turned their faces toward the wall. The popular memory of the man who walked through that gate is fixed in 1943, the gliders on the rocky shelf at Gran Sasso. Mussolini lifted off the mountaintop in a Fieseler Storch that should not have been able to take off, the headline that Eisenhower's intelligence staff stamped onto a wanted poster. The most dangerous man in Europe. That photograph froze the man. Everything that came after, the average viewer has never been told: the Dachau acquittal of September 9, 1947, the escape of July 1948, the Madrid years, the Calle del Pinar address, the Avenida General Perón office, the Mossad telephone call of September 1962, the death certificate from Hospital La Paz, Madrid, dated July 5, 1975, Operation Greif and the false flag jeeps of December 1944. The Malmedy investigation file, Nara Record Group 153. 10 defendants acquitted at Dachau. The September 1948 internment camp disappearance. The 1950 arrival in Madrid via Paris and Salzburg. The alleged 1953 advisory contact with Nasser's Egypt. The 1962 approach in Dublin. Odessa, Die Spinner. Names historians like Guy Walters and Stuart Smith have spent decades parsing fact from legend. But the man at the center of those layers is not on a glider in this story. He is at a Madrid desk in 1962, lifting a telephone to a voice that says it belongs to a German businessman. And that belongs in fact to an Israeli case officer, the conversation historians could not reconstruct from the archive until the early 2000s, the conversation that begins where the legend ends. Friedenthal, the SS commando school that built the man Eisenhower feared. Otto Skorzeny was 34 years old. He was 6 feet 4 inches tall, an Austrian engineering graduate, a former Vienna street fighter, and he carried across his left cheek the diagonal scar of a student dueling fraternity. Born in Vienna on June 12, 1908, trained as an engineer drawn into the Austrian Nazi movement in the early 1930s, he had served as an SS officer on the Eastern Front and been sent home in 1942 with stomach ulcers and a head injury. In April 1943, on a transfer order routed through Ernst Kaltenbrunner's office, he was given command of Sonderlehrgang Oranienburg ZBV Friedenthal, a special-purpose training unit at a hunting lodge north of Berlin. The Friedenthal formation files at the Bundesarchiv in the NS-19 series of the Reichsführer SS personal staff record a small command, a few hundred men, glider pilots, demolition specialists, foreign language speakers. The unit had no clear purpose. Then Italy collapsed. On July 25, 1943, the fascist Grand Council voted Mussolini out. The king ordered him arrested. He was moved between locations to keep his whereabouts secret. By early September, he was held at the Campo Imperatore Hotel, a ski resort at 42 degrees 26 minutes north, 13 degrees 33 minutes east, on a saddle of the Gran Sasso Massif at 2,130 meters elevation, reachable only by funicular. On September 12, 1943, 12 DFS 230 gliders carrying Skorzeny's commandos and a parallel force of 100 Fallschirmjäger paratroopers under Major Harold Moores landed on the rocky meadow above the hotel. The fighting lasted minutes, no shots fired by the rescuers. The Carabinieri garrison surrendered. Pilot Heinrich Gerlach lifted off the same shelf in a Fieseler Storch with Mussolini and Skorzeny aboard, 3 men in a 2-seat aircraft at maximum overload, the wheels skipping along a 100-meter stretch of broken ground before the lift took. The Italian Carabinieri records held at the Archivio Centrale dello Stato in Rome recorded the operation as a coordinated airborne raid. The Bundesarchiv files recorded the same. The German propaganda office produced something else. Signal magazine put Skorzeny's face on its October 1943 cover. The Knight's Cross was pinned by Hitler personally. The legend was built in a week, and here is where the historiographic record diverges from the popular memory before the war is even over. The operational record at Friedenthal, in the war diaries, in the Italian files, shows a small, high-risk, well-coordinated airborne action with shared command. Major Moores led the paratroopers. The operational planning was joint. The propaganda record shows one man on a glider. Charles Whiting documented the gap in 1972. Stuart Smith documented it again with broader archival access in 2018. The myth, in other words, was an operational asset before it was a post-war liability. By October, the photograph was on every front page in occupied Europe. 6 weeks later, a file with Skorzeny's name on its cover crossed Eisenhower's intelligence desk in London, and in the margin of one summary page, a hand whose owner the post-war literature has never conclusively identified wrote the 4 words that would follow this man for the rest of his life. Operation Greif, the false flag jeeps and the Malmedy shadow. On October 22, 1944, at the Wolfschanze in East Prussia, Adolf Hitler personally ordered Otto Skorzeny to assemble a brigade of English-speaking soldiers in American uniforms for a winter offensive whose date he was not yet permitted to know. The order, recorded in the war diary of the OKW operations staff and reconstructed from post-war interrogation transcripts at NAR, a record group 338, gave Skorzeny 6 weeks. The new formation was designated Panzer Brigade 150. Its training base was Grafenwöhr. Its requested equipment list included American jeeps, M3 half-tracks and Sherman pattern disguises mounted on Panzer V Aus FG chassis with sheet metal panels welded over the silhouette. Roughly 30% of the requested equipment ever materialized. The Sherman disguises fooled no one in daylight. The English-language screening of recruits collapsed when it became clear that fewer than 10 men in the entire brigade could pass for Native American speakers. Most of the volunteers had taken school English in Cologne or Hamburg in the 1930s. The plan was already failing on paper. Within the brigade, a smaller commando element was carved out, Einheit Stielau, named after its first commander, with 9 teams trained for infiltration in frontline American uniform. Their mission was sabotage and confusion behind the lines, cutting telephone cable, reversing road signs, redirecting columns. On December 16, 1944, the morning the Ardennes offensive opened, the 9 Stilo teams crossed into American territory in jeeps. One reached the Meuse, one reversed road signs at Mannheim and sent an American column the wrong way at a critical junction. Most were captured within 48 hours, then the panic began. Captured commandos at the Liège Interrogation Center under questioning by U.S. Army CIC officers, the transcripts are at NARA RG 498, talked freely. One of them, perhaps embellishing, claimed that a team had been dispatched to assassinate General Eisenhower himself at Versailles. The claim was unsupported by any operational order in the Bundesarchiv Militararchiv RH-21 series for the 6th Panzer Army. It was almost certainly false. It worked anyway. Schaeff locked Versailles down. Eisenhower was confined to his quarters under heavy guard. Officers traveled in helmets and unmarked vehicles. American military police checked identifications by asking questions about baseball, state capitals, and Betty Grable. The story of the Eisenhower assassination plot ran in the American press through Christmas. By the time it was quietly walked back, Skorzeny's name had reached every American household with a radio. The killings at Malmedy on December 17, 1944, recorded in NARA Record Group 153 file 100-450, took place inside a separate command. Joachim Peiper's Kampfgruppe Peiper, an element of the 1st SS Panzer Division. Peiper was 31 years old at the time. The two formations were not connected. No court has placed Skorzeny at Malmedy or held him responsible for what happened there. The historical record on this point is unambiguous. But the Malmedy investigation, the Greif investigation, and the Stielau interrogations were filed in the same physical building at the U.S. War Crimes Branch at Wiesbaden. By the spring of 1945, they were stacked on the same shelf. The assassination scare faded inside a week. The brigade was disbanded inside a month, but the legal question Skorzeny had created for himself by ordering men into enemy uniform did not fade. It sat in a folder at the U.S. War Crimes Branch with his name on the cover, and it would be opened in a courtroom at Dachau 2.5 years later. Dachau, August 1947, the trial that should have ended him. On August 18, 1947, in a converted SS barracks at the Dachau internment camp, Case 6-100 of the United States Military Tribunal opened against 10 men, with Otto Skorzeny seated first in the dock. The charge was the use of enemy uniform during combat in violation of the laws of war. The lead prosecutor was Lieutenant Colonel Albert Rosenfeld. The senior defense counsel was Lieutenant Colonel Robert Durst, a U.S. Army officer assigned to the case. The trial transcript, held at NARA Record Group 153 in the records of the Office of the Judge Advocate General, was declassified in 1958 with substantial redactions, and reduced redactions in 1995. Stuart Smith's 2018 reconstruction works directly from this material. The prosecution case was, on its face, strong. Captured Stalag commandos had been wearing American uniforms when taken. The order forming Panzer Brigade 150 had Skorzeny's signature on it. The orders for the Stalag detachment had passed through his command. The casualties produced by the Manhay incident were documented. The Versailles panic was on the record. Then the case began to soften. The prosecution could not produce a single witness who placed Skorzeny's men in frontline American uniform during combat firing, the legal threshold the charge actually required. The Stalag teams had been disguised, yes, but the doctrine of perfidy, as it stood in 1947, distinguished between wearing enemy uniform for infiltration and shedding it before combat versus fighting in it. Skorzeny's documented orders specifically required the men to discard the American uniform before any direct engagement. Whether the order had been followed in every case was a separate question, and one the prosecution could not close. Then came the witness who decided the trial. On September 6, 1947, Wing Commander Forrest Frederick Edward Yeo Thomas, GC, of the British Special Operations Executive, took the stand for the defence. His SOE file, HS9 series at the UK National Archives at Kew, documents in detail what he then said in open court, that he himself, as an SOE agent in occupied France, had operated in German uniform behind enemy lines on multiple occasions, that British SOE doctrine had explicitly authorised it, and that if Skorzeny was a war criminal for what Panzer Brigade 150 had done, then he, Yeo Thomas, was equally a war criminal for what SOE had done. He named missions, he named dates, he named the British officer who had authorised the operations. The prosecution had no answer. On September 9, 1947, the tribunal returned a unanimous acquittal on all charges for all 10 defendants. The American press filed the verdict as a footnote behind the larger Nuremberg cases that were running in parallel. The newspapers in Vienna and Munich gave it more space. Skorzeny did not walk out a free man. The acquittal closed the war crimes case. It did not close the denazification case. He was returned that same afternoon to a holding cell pending classification proceedings under the Allied denazification machinery, proceedings he would have spent years inside. Here is the historiographic structural outcome the popular memory has never absorbed. The Dachau acquittal, the July 1948 escape, the Spanish residency, and the long Madrid years sit in 3 different national archives, in 3 different languages, under 3 different access regimes. NARA Record Group 153 in College Park, the Bundesarchiv NS 19 in Berlin-Lichterfelde, the Spanish Ministerio del Interior records in Madrid, partially closed to this day. No post-war consensus narrative knitted them together until the specialist literature of the late 1990s and 2000s, Guy Walter's Hunting Evil in 2009, Stuart Smith's Otto Skorzeny, The Devil's Disciple in 2018, Spanish-language research that crossed slowly into English. The suppression here is not a conspiracy. It is the historiographic preference for short stories. The acquittal was read in open court. The press filed it as a footnote behind larger Nuremberg verdicts. And Skorzeny was returned that same afternoon to a holding cell pending denazification proceedings he already understood he was not going to wait out. The question, by the spring of 1948 was no longer whether he would walk out of that camp, only on which night and through which gate and with whose silence. Madrid, the protection of Franco and the man who never stopped working. On July 27, 1948, at approximately 1940 hours, 3 men in US military police uniforms walked out of the Darmstadt internment facility through a side gate, and the records of the US Army's 7,707th European Command Intelligence Center recorded their absence at the next morning's roll call 11 hours later. The 3 were Skorzeny, his former adjutant Karl Radl, and a third former SS officer whose identity the declassified CIA name file at NARA Record Group 263 confirmed only after the partial releases of 2001 and 2005 under the Nazi War Crimes Disclosure Act of 1998. The American MP uniforms were almost certainly not stolen. They were almost certainly handed over. By whom and on whose authority, the declassified record does not say. There was no manhunt. There was no formal recapture order issued for Skorzeny by the US Army. The 7,707th file on the disappearance is short. The escape route, as historian Guy Walters reconstructed it from the CYA name file, ran from Darmstadt to Paris, then south to Salzburg in the French zone of occupied Austria, where Skorzeny remained for more than a year, and then to Madrid in 1950. He arrived in Spain on a passport that the Franco government either issued or recognized. The CIA assessment of his status, written in 1951 and held at NARA RG 263, described him as of operational interest but not directly recruited. That phrase recurs across the file for a decade. In Madrid, he became a businessman. He registered an import-export firm in 1951. The Avenida General Perón office handled steel, machine tools, and engineering contracts. His apartment was on the Calle del Pinar. In 1954, he married Ilse Lütje, niece of Hjalmar Schacht, the former Reichsbank president and Nuremberg defendant who had himself been acquitted in 1946. The marriage gave Skorzeny a new circle of contacts across the German exile community in Spain and Argentina. The CIA name file, reading across its declassified pages, shows a man under continuous low-grade observation by multiple Western intelligence services who never moved against him. Reinhard Gehlen's organization, the post-war West German Foreign Intelligence Service that became the BND, had documented contact with him through intermediaries. The US Counterintelligence Corps continued to file reports on his movements. The CIA never recruited him as an asset, but the file records repeated debriefings on his commercial contacts in the Middle East. The popular image of post-war German escape networks, what Frederick Forsyth's 1972 novel called Odessa, what others called Die Spinne, does not match the archive. What historians have called the post-war escape networks were, in Walter's reconstruction, looser, more improvised, more dependent on individual sympathizers and individual states than on any structured organization. Odessa, as a named hierarchical body, has not been found in any archive. The archive shows something less cinematic and more uncomfortable, a network of state conveniences. By the early 1950s, the trade in expertise had begun. After the 1952 Egyptian Revolution and Gamal Abdel Nasser's consolidation of power, German technicians and former officers began moving to Cairo on contracts to advise Egyptian military and police institutions. Skorzeny's name appears repeatedly in the CIA name file entries of 1953 and 1954 in connection with this trade. Whether he traveled to Egypt in person, whether he served Nasser's intelligence service, the Mukhabarat, directly, or whether he acted as a Madrid-based middleman placing other Germans into Egyptian contracts. The documentary record allows all 3 readings, and historians divide on which is closest to the truth. Stuart Smith's 2018 reconstruction leans toward the third. By the time the Mossad team in Dublin in September 1962 placed the call to a Madrid number, Skorzeny had been a free, working, married businessman for 14 years, and what the Israelis wanted from him was not his arrest. That, as would be seen, was the strangest part of the whole arrangement. The Mossad approach, the Egyptian engineers, and a death certificate from Madrid. In Dublin in September 1962, in the bar of the Shelbourne Hotel, an Israeli case officer named Rafi Eitan sat down across from a 6'4" Austrian and explained in careful German what would happen if the Austrian did not agree to work for the State of Israel. The conversation is reconstructed in Ronan Bergman's Rise and Kill First, published in 2018, drawing on extensive Mossad archival access. It is corroborated in less detail in Dan Raviv and Yossi Melman's Spies Against Armageddon, published in 2012. Eitan was 42. He had been a senior officer on the Eichmann capture team in Buenos Aires 2 years earlier. He came to Dublin because Skorzeny was there visiting business contacts. The Israeli concern was the Egyptian missile program at Heliopolis. NASA had hired German engineers, Wolfgang Pilz, Heinz Krug, Hans Kleinwachter, others, to build surface-to-surface missiles intended eventually for use against Israel. Mossad's response, an operation later named Damocles, included letter bombs, abductions, and direct pressure on the engineers and their families inside West Germany. Heinz Krug was abducted from Munich on September 11, 1962, and the body was never recovered. Eitan's offer to Skorzeny, as Bergman documents it from Mossad records, was straightforward. Mossad had a separate file on Skorzeny's name. That file could be closed. In return, Skorzeny would provide names, addresses, technical assessments, and behavioral readings of the German engineers in Cairo whom he knew personally through the Madrid network. He agreed. For the next several years, according to the Mossad sources Bergman accessed, Skorzeny served as an Israeli informant on the Egyptian missile program. The information he provided shaped the Damocles target lists. By 1965, under combined pressure, the German engineers had largely withdrawn from Cairo. The program collapsed. Skorzeny had effectively helped close down a project he had, in earlier years, very possibly helped staff. He lived another decade. He continued to run his Madrid business. He was photographed at SS veterans' reunions. He gave interviews to West German magazines in which he denied any role in war crimes and praised the Wehrmacht. He never returned to Austria. A 1948 Austrian arrest warrant remained technically open, and he never returned to Germany except briefly. On July 5, 1975, at Hospital La Paz in Madrid, he died of lung cancer, age 67. The death is recorded in the Spanish civil registry Registro Civil de Madrid, July 1975. The funeral was held at the Almudena Cemetery. The mourners included former Wehrmacht and Waffen-SS veterans who gave the German military salute, the open-handed military gesture, not the regime's salute, a distinction that matters in every photograph of the funeral that survives. There were no state honors. There was no Spanish government representative. The grave was marked with an iron cross. Here is the proof that already exists inside the archive, NARA Record Group 263, the CIA name file on Otto Skorzeny, declassified in stages between 2001 and 2007. NARA Record Group 153, the Dachau trial transcript, declassified 1958 with reduced redactions in 1995. UK National Archives HS9 series, the SOE files including the Yo Thomas testimony documentation, Bundesarchiv NS19 series for the Friedenthal formation files, Bundesarchiv Militärarchiv RH21 series for the 6th Panzer Army. Stuart Smith's 2018 archival reconstruction, Guy Walters' 2009 work on the post-war escape question, Ronan Bergman's 2018 access to Mossad sources, the Spanish Civil Registry death certificate. Nothing in the granular post-war record is in genuine dispute. The story has not changed, only its delivery has. The file at NARA RG 263 was still being declassified in pieces as late as 2007. The Mossad documentation reached print only in 2018. The Spanish records remain partly closed to this day, and the question is no longer what Otto Skorzeny did between 1945 and 1975, but why the most dangerous man in Europe became the most useful man in 3 intelligence services and was buried in 1975 with full military honors by men who had served alongside him in a war the world had agreed to remember without him. The headstone at the Almudena Cemetery in Madrid carries his name and the date, July 5, 1975. There is no state symbol on it. The Iron Cross is there. The dueling scar, recorded in every wartime photograph from Vienna in the 1930s, through the propaganda cover of Signal magazine in 1943, through the Dachau dock photographs of August 1947, through the Madrid press images of the 1960s, is by then long buried. But the photographs themselves are still in the archive. The Bundesarchiv collection, the Signal run at the Imperial War Museum, the press files in Madrid. The man who designed the Gran Sasso raid, who wore an American uniform he had not been issued in 1944 and again in 1948, who advised in Madrid and informed for Mossad in the matter of the Egyptian engineers, was not hidden by a conspiracy. He was hidden by the quiet, accumulated convenience of half a dozen states that found him more useful alive and silent than on a witness stand. The American Counterintelligence Corps had its reasons. The Galen Organization had its reasons. Franco's Spain had its reasons. Mossad in 1962 had its reasons. Each agency closed its own door behind him. The textbook compression closed the last one. The historical record has not changed. The documents are still in the archive. Otto Skorzeny, fallecido el 5 de julio de 1975, Madrid. This content is for educational and historical reflection purposes only. For academic citation, please consult the primary archival sources referenced.